Imaging and processing the moon. We're going to do this specifically with an AstroCamera. We're going to take video footage of the top left, the top right, the bottom right and the bottom left. We're going to stack that video footage and then we're going to build up a mosaic and process it. Fairly obviously you're going to need a telescope. I've got a refractor based telescope with a focal length of 910mm and an aperture of 81mm. In front of the AstroCamera you can see here a filter wheel and a mirror diagonal that lets me flip between the AstroCamera and an eyepiece. You don't necessarily need either of those. This is how we focus our camera. And then here I've got slow motion controls. So once we set our telescope on our object, we can use the slow motion controls to track across the object, going from left to right, up and down. If you've got slow motion controls, then set them exactly to the middle of their threads before you start any work. We've got a computer which we're going to use for capturing and processing the footage. And finally we've got our AstroCamera. I'm using a colour camera, but you could use a mono camera if you prefer. If you do happen to have a mirror diagonal that lets you flick between the camera and an eyepiece, then I would probably use a 15mm eyepiece. It will just help you spot the moon, get it all lined up, and then you can switch to the camera to start recording your footage. I'm using a Velux window. A better option would have been a Velux window that's a fire escape because it pivots at the top rather than in the middle. Once you're set up and ready to start recording your video, you'll want to be in darkness. I'd suggest some low-level red lighting, and a light-up keyboard can be really useful to help you see the keys. So we fire up whatever application you're using to capture your video footage. Connect to the camera and then point your telescope at the moon. At this point, if you've got a mirror diagonal that you can flick over to an eyepiece, then you could use the eyepiece to find the moon and then flick back to the camera. And when we're focusing the moon, we want to get the circumference of the moon nice and sharp, and just look at the surface detail on the moon as well, just make sure that looks nice and sharp. Make sure exposure is correct. If you've got histogram available in your application, you can use this to see if you're clipping either your high tones or your low tones. Use your slow motion controls to get the top left of the moon into view, and then start taking your video footage. You'll probably want about 15 seconds of footage. Once you've done, use your slow motion controls again to go to the top right, and then the bottom right, and then the bottom left, taking video footage each time. You can see me tweaking the exposure there. What you need to remember of the moon is that it's really bright. Even though you're working at night, it's obviously reflecting the light from the sun. Now that we've got all our footage, we're going to start processing it in a stacking application. I'm using Auto Stack It. Open one video at a time and set your screen up exactly the same as you see the left-hand pane on mine, and then press Analyze. Take note of the quality graph in the middle because this will give you an indication of what percentage of frames are high quality. Once the footage has been analysed, press the Place AP Grid button to automatically place alignment points. Take another look at your quality graph and set the percentage of frames you want to stack based on that graph. In this case I'm doing about 20% of frames. Now that you've got single stacked images of each of your videos, put them into Photoshop, get your levels correct, and then crop out any imperfections. We're looking to get each image correct and consistent, ready for stitching. Auto levels in Photoshop tends to work quite well, but I find it clips the high tones a little bit too much. So I'm going to go into each colour channel and just adjust the high tones by exactly the same amount. And finally I'm just tweaking the mid-tones a little bit here. Now that we've processed each stacked image, we're going to load them into our stitching software, in this case Microsoft Image Composite Editor, and I'm initially looking to just bring in the highest quality photos of each area of the moon, and then if we've got any gaps we can always fill those in with slightly lower quality images. As you can see, it does a pretty good job of stitching our images. So we're going to press next on this screen, and then we've got the ability to crop the image down. Finally, we export the image, and I'd always recommend doing this in PNG format. So now we're ready to process our final image, and the first thing we're going to do is flip it the correct way round. This handy little guide from BBC Sky at Night magazine will give you an idea of what to do there. At each step I suggest you duplicate the previous layer so that you can always work your way back. And the first thing I'm going to do is just play with the shadows and highlights just to see if I can reveal just a little bit more detail out of the moon here. Next up, we're going to enhance local contrast. I've created an action to enable me to do this quickly. I suggest you just Google this and you'll find some really good guides on how to make one of these actions. I've also run an action for high definition sharpening. Again, have a look online, you'll find some information on how to create this. If you take into account that when we look at the moon, we're looking through many layers of atmosphere, you can probably understand that the moon's going to be quite blurred. So what we're trying to do here is just sharpen the moon up, but without over processing it, because we don't want it to look unreal. Probably a good tip would be to get it looking really crisp on screen and then just back it off a little bit. Finally, I'm just going to tweak the curves to bring out a little bit of hidden detail, and if you want to reveal some hidden colour, try raising your saturation up in HOE saturation. And that's it, we've got our processed image. Again, save it as a PNG if you want to retain the quality, or save it as a JPEG if you want to share it around on the web. So for the final word on this video, we're going to look at using a digital DSLR camera instead of an AstroCamera, and we'll have a look at histograms as well. So first of all, you're going to need to set your camera to manual focus, and then you're going to need to remove the lens. The next thing to do will be to fit either a 1.25 inch or a 2 inch adapter, as the telescope's now going to become our lens. There tends to be little dots on the camera and the adapter to help you locate where it needs to go. So your camera just fits right into the end of the telescope, exactly where your AstroCamera would have gone. I've removed my filter wheel as well here, but you don't necessarily need to do that. So that's now ready to capture, but we don't want to be using this shutter button because pressing that will shake the camera too much and we'll get blurry images. So we either need to use a remote, in which case we'll need to set the camera up accordingly, or we could use a USB cable and some software to control the camera. Digicam Control 2 seems to be quite a good piece of free software for doing this. Now I'd like to touch briefly on histograms, because this is important whether we're using an AstroCamera or an SLR camera. You can see in this photo here of the moon that what I've exposed is about dead centre of the histogram, so we've got no clipping in either the high tones or the low tones. So to give you a comparison, this is an underexposed photo, and to correct this we need to lower the shutter speed to let in more light. Whereas this is an overexposed photo, and to correct this we're going to raise the shutter speed to let in less light. So when you lower your shutter speed, for example setting it to say 10 seconds, you'll be leaving the shutter open for it to expose 10 seconds worth of light. Whereas when you raise it for say half a second, you'll be letting in only half a second of light. And finally, if you want to increase your magnification, you could use a Barlow lens like this, and you'd simply place that in between the camera and the telescope. You may need an extension tube to achieve focus. So both these pictures were taken on the same night. The AstroCam did perform better, but then I had used that in video mode and stacked the video and then made a mosaic, whereas the SLR I'd simply taken a one shot of the whole of the moon.